Ladies and gentlemen, friends, listeners and colleagues, troubled times within our industry and every industry, all over the globe. So sympathies with everybody. This morning, I've got an old friend and a colleague and actually speaking to him from Canada. So I'd like to introduce Stan Wraight, who's the president and CEO of SASI. And SASI is the Strategic Aviation Solutions International Group, well known within the aviation industry. Stan, welcome, and thanks for giving us a bit of your time.
Well, thanks, Chris. I'm always willing to talk to an old friend like you. I know you're one of the professionals that I've always respected, so my pleasure.
I really appreciate that, Stan, and I didn't have to pay anything for that, so it's even more appreciated.
Well, then the call's going to end. I thought payment was coming.
No, but Stan, seriously, before we start having a chat about the impact and everything, absolutely unprecedented times, shocks, and, it's amazing what an impact this virus has had on the entire globe. So, firstly, sympathies, appreciation, plaudits, everything to anybody associated with the front line. So doctors, nurses, care attendants, anybody associated with support for those various outlets. Really, really appreciate every single thing that you're doing. Well done.
Well, yeah, I've got to reinforce that. It goes well beyond those people too. I mean, just think of the people that are working in the grocery stores, the pharmacies. My daughter is a service director for Air Canada. She's, just been drafted into doing 2 flights to bring Canadians home from Japan. These people are going voluntarily. And they're not being forced by the company, and my hat's off to all of them. It's really great.
Exactly, and it's times like these that thank God the good in people comes out, and it shows how much people care. And long may that stand. And all the people that are doing all the panic buying and stuff. You need to step back, take a look at yourself, and just realise what you're doing to everything. It's not the right thing to do. So show a little bit of compassion, especially to the older generation.
And it's unbelievable when you hear these stories.
Yeah, unbelievable, unacceptable.
Well, I consider myself, I guess, part of that. Yeah.
What do you mean, part of that?
Well, Chris, I've been in this business for a long time. I'm not ashamed to say that. I've learned a lot over the years. I've been through a lot. But what I'm seeing now is totally unprecedented. And the aviation industry is going to suffer the most. But what I'm afraid of is that people aren't going to learn the lessons. We have a bad history in the aviation business of not learning lessons from things that have happened to us. But I think this time the customer base is going to be looking at things differently than they did in the past. Once we get through this, and we will, it may take longer than most people are thinking, because we have to go on to a war footing, because we're very blessed. Most of us that we know, and friends that we know, even parents, didn't have to go through the Second World War. But what people went through after the Second World War was, in a lot of cases, just as bad as what happened during the war. Other than the death and destruction, of course, economically, availability of supplies, just the day-to-day life didn't return to normal for many, many years after the war. And I think we're going to be looking at that too here. It's not going to be, it stops tomorrow, everybody turns the lights back on and we go back to normal. It's just not going to happen.
I think you're right, Stan. And I was talking to somebody earlier on this morning, and they were talking about return to normal, and I think there's going to be a new normal. It's not going to be the normal that people knew yesterday or 3 months ago or 2 weeks ago. The new normal is going to be very, very different, and hopefully some good will come out of it, and people will look at things that they thought were important previously, and they won't be so important, and things that they overlooked and took for granted, they'll start to focus a little bit more on. And one of those areas is to do with, the services that you buy and the products that you buy, and how much you should be willing to pay for it in a safe and secure manner.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Chris. Let's be honest now. What's going to happen? A lot of people are going to lose their jobs. I mean, there's estimates up to 20%, but 20% is probably where it's going to hit, because just think of all the services industries, the hospitality industry, the aviation industry, it's going to take a while to ramp all that back up again. And it won't ever come back to what it was before because it's going to take years.
Yeah.
That's one issue. But the people, the buying power of the people and the shock factor of travel and the dangers of travel, people are going to think twice about it. And we need people to fly in order for the aviation business to exist. I think there's also a lesson to be learned here of, and you have to think forward a bit. What are these companies going to do now in their supply chain?
Yeah.
This morning they announced in the U.S. that one of the reasons they'll never hit the number of test kits that they need is that the basic raw materials to make a test kit are not available. Even things like swabs to put in a test kit are not available, and there's a shortage. I was shocked to learn that 80% in the U.S. of the base raw material to make common pharmaceuticals is imported from China. In India, where we're on the second largest pharmaceutical manufacturing, mostly generic drugs, but pharmaceutical, it's 40%. How did we allow ourselves to become so dependent on one geographic region to supply base materials for things like pharmaceuticals, which should be a basic human right? It's shocking.
Price.
It's shocking, really.
It's terrible.
And then start thinking about what are these people going to do now? Are they going to learn a lesson? If they do learn a lesson, and they start nearshoring instead of offshoring, what's that going to do to us as far as air freight is concerned? I mean, you got to start thinking about this. And there's other developments too. Everybody in the air cargo industry that we've all devoted our life to, we've been saying for years, you've got to consider that, most of the world's goods that are needed to keep these supply lines going and everything else are moved by air. And okay, you're going to have a lot going by sea, that's for sure, probably 99% or 98%. But that 1%, when we get into an emergency like we have now,
yep.
Becomes ever more valuable. And what scares me a lot is the downplaying of the real role that air cargo plays in our day-to-day existence. It's got to be strategically rethought.
100%, and that's why we're saying there won't be it'll be a new normal. It won't be the way it was. And the point you touched on there, Stan, with relying on one particular region or one particular area, and it's nothing negative about any area, country, or organisation, but I think governments and organisations now, they're going to have to take a lot more respect for risk, and if it's getting a little bit too high and they set certain standards, then they're going to have to look at alternatives. Otherwise, similar sort of things will happen again in the future, and God forbid when this gets resolved, it's ever allowed to happen again. It'll be unforgivable.
It is, but people don't learn lessons. I mean, we had Ebola, we had SARS, we had MERS, we had it was an obvious thing that we were going to end up in another global pandemic because people can travel between continents for prices unheard of before.
Yep.
I mean, less than $1,000, you can fly from the U.S. to China and back. Less than $1,000. We were doing some work out on the West Coast for one of the airports recently, and we interviewed some of the Chinese carriers. $750 return between the West Coast of the U.S. and China, which means global travel is just going to continue that way, and people in these growing economies have money to buy, and they're going to travel as well. So what's the most logical thing you should be thinking about as a risk is something like a pandemic. But they didn't learn.
Exactly.
Why didn't they learn?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying it's easy for us to sit here and criticise, but all the politicians that I've seen now, the stress on their faces and the focus of what they're trying to do, they're actually doing what they were paid to do and what politicians are supposed to do, which is lead the people for the good of the people. And I really, really sympathise with them. But coming back to your point about the affordability of travel, I think the new normal is going to have to take into account some of the practices that were being done by some countries already, whereby temperatures were always being taken going in and out of certain countries, and certain restrictions were in place. And that's going to have to come back. And the cost of that is going to have to be borne by paying higher prices for travel and also higher prices for freight forwarding, Stan. And it's something that's necessary because the training of people, the sustainability of the businesses, and people not taking shortcuts. The only way it can be done is through paying for it.
Well, you're absolutely right. And today's normal is speed, transparency, and quality. I mean, that's what the whole world wants. I mean, e-commerce is driving standards where people expect a lot for what they're getting. And the unfortunate thing is, and it's a supply chain. In the past couple of years, it's been each party taking their, well, some will say fair share, and some will say disproportionate share of what the actual income is, and the asset holder, which is the airlines, are left with the leftovers. That's got to stop, and I'll tell you why. Basically, we need freighters. We do need freighters. It's a strategic, absolute need. And the reason the freighters are going away with the scheduled airlines is not because there's a massive increase in belly capacity. It's because they don't pay for themselves. And if they don't pay for themselves, there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
And if you look at the actual consumer, he's paying for it. It's just that the money is not filtering down to the people who have to maintain these strategic assets and pay this kind of money. That's number one. Number two, what really worries me is if the whole industry doesn't realize what's going to happen with the situation with a panic after what we've seen going on now, factories are going to nearshore. And if they nearshore everything, if they start bringing everything back, and the global economy, as far as manufacturing, is being retrenched back to just a safe and secure way of doing things, if that 80% of pharmaceuticals raw materials is now by common sense going to be manufactured where the pharmaceuticals are manufactured, that's going to hit us all. And we have to have a plan B, and we don't have one at the moment. We don't even have a plan A, I think.
Yeah.
It's just common sense, I think, that especially European countries who have divested of freighters like crazy, except for Lufthansa. Are you really doing the right thing? Is that really what you need? If your Air Force can't pick up the slack in a time of an emergency to bring needed goods in from other places, to keep your factories open, to keep your food chain supplied, to keep your companies that require parts and medical supplies, how are you going to do that if you don't even have the equipment to do it?
Yeah, no, it's valid points.
It's just shocking.
Oh, valid points. Yeah. Also talking with somebody this morning.
The other thing, Chris,
they reminded me that the first wide body flight was JFK to LHR with Pan Am some 50 years ago, and how pallets and containers and wide bodied aircraft and how it's developed, which obviously has had an impact on pricing and affordability of the freighters. But Stan, I agree with you. I think as far as risk now and certain quotas and certain backup, people are going to have to look at things very, very differently, because something as substantial as what we're going through now can have such a huge impact, and on some countries who are dependent on everything that comes into that
Chris,
country.
You're breaking up on this side.
Sorry, my friend. Can you hear me now? Yeah, Stan. Sorry, but we had a little bit of a break up there. But one of the things that I think now, anyhow, is that countries, governments, everybody are going to have a little bit of risk aversion, and they're going to have to be aware of things that could go wrong, and keep some sort of a quota. Now, that quota, whether it be certain amounts of freighters or whether it be certain amounts of guidelines, etc., things are going to have to change. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I've always been a freighter-friendly guy. Let's put it that way. I understand that, I always use the 80-20 rule in all my thinking. My many days working for a European airline, 32 years with KLM, I learned the value of the combi. And, we didn't see We didn't see the freighter as an absolute need, other than supplemental 1, 2, 3 to keep the passenger bellies full. The combis were the backbone of our thoughts. And I heard this week that KLM is considering, well, not considering, they decided to retire their 747 fleet faster.
Yeah.
And that's a real shame, especially now. And I think one of the things that a lot of carriers are doing is flying their passenger aircraft as freighters. I think you've heard about it. I mean, there's lots of carriers now that are operating because people are willing to pay enough to make a flight at least viable. Be it just covering the variable costs, I doubt it's going to add some contribution. But you look at the 747 combi during the Gulf War and the SARS epidemic. Carriers like EVA, KLM, and others, basically the contribution that the cargo department made to their survival during all those times when there was no overfly in the Middle East, etc., was huge.
Yeah.
And that airplane, for example, the combi, I hope KLM reconsiders, because if you fly a passenger airplane, and I think, like we said before, I don't think this is going to be a 3-4 months and then everything's back to normal. I think it's going to take more than a year and a half, maybe even 2 years to get everything back to normal. And what I mean by that is cargo is going to have to start once production is up again. And there's nearshoring is not going to happen in a quick succession of decision making. It's going to take years to do anything about it. But in the meantime, we're going to need air cargo capacity. And the combi, for example, if you take the 9 lower deck pallets and the 7 main decks, you got about 216 cubic meters of space in that thing. Whereas you take a 787 or a 777, you've got about roughly 120 cubic meters. What the 747 combi is a mini freighter, and KLM should think about that for the coming 12 to 18 months. That's going to be a valuable asset to get goods and services and medical supplies and whatever else is needed going. But then, okay, they have to retire. But then somehow or the other, the Netherlands has to think about everything that they want to do. The travel industry is one thing, but what about the manufacturing, the distribution centers, their floral activity, the flower market, how much that contributes to the economy? And they need this to work, and other countries as well. There are very few freighters in the U.S. at the moment.
Yeah.
What are they going to do other than bringing the military in? Even the military doesn't have enough airplanes because they're constantly chartering for the Civil Reserve Air Force. Yeah, it's going to have to take some strategic rethinking, and not just a profit and loss statement. That governments are going to have to think about this until the decisions made on supply chains and global supply chains and what they're going to do about it to protect their national interests. Air freight might be the only way to go. And
it's also Stan as well is the affordability and the willingness of people now to pay, to pay certain prices for certain commodities and not assume that it can always be just keep coming down and down and down. And I think too much of that has happened in the past. And when you look at certain things and you value them, and then you look at things that are associated with the transportation, the supply chain, even with holidays and vacations, the prices they're just unrealistically low.
Well, Chris, the problem is at the moment, we're a consumer society. I'm going to talk about North America now in particular. We're a consumer society, and we are expecting everything to be cheap. I mean, the Walmarts of this world have taught people that if you go there, you can buy things for cheaper prices than you can on the high street. Why? Bulk buying, manufacturing offshore, and everything else. I mean, the generation that is there today is a disposal generation. They buy clothes and throw them away after a season. They buy products. They buy them the cheapest they can find, and if it breaks, they buy another one. My generation, we bought less, but whatever we bought, it was quality.
Yeah.
And normally quality is not cheap. And if it's not cheap and you're willing to, if you look at things differently, which I think our generation does, I'd rather have less, but have whatever I have being better. And it's going to last for one thing, but I'm not going to have a problem with it. It's a throwaway society today. I mean, you see it in our environmental impact of the throwaway society. What's happening with all of these clothes stores and everything else, and the amount of pollution, it's just unbelievable.
I know.
But that's just one.
I agree. And also from a moral and an ethical perspective as well. You know, you look at some of the low cost areas that are producing some of the goods, and the returns for the people that are actually manufacturing it and frontline, whether it be children, whether it be people who are just forced to work long hours. It's all part of that throwaway society that you've mentioned, and people have to rethink now, I think.
Well, yeah, and getting back to the effect that it's going to have on us. You know, we as an industry have always said, 2%, 1.5%, 2%, depending on who you believe, of the global economy volume is going by air. Okay, I mean, coal is not going to go by air, oil is not going to go by air. So 2%, 1.5% of the tonnage, but 35% of the value. That I don't care about that, to be honest with you. What I'm talking about is the fact that the things that are going to move by air in the future are necessary things. Food. Yep. If you have a drought in the U.S. and you have to import food, if there's a problem with growing populations and the local economy has a problem like Ebola, people have to be able to get goods in and get goods out. Things that are important for our society, and things that are important to, when I say society, I mean people to have a job, to earn income, to be able to buy the things that they need for sustainability, like healthcare and everything else. You have to work, and if you're going to work, the only way you're going to work is if these production lines stay open. Yep. And there's 150,000 people that are going to be laid off in the U.S. this week because all the three major car manufacturers are closing their plants. Now, if that's not a shock to people about what can happen, because the drive to get the lowest cost of anything in the past was driving everything, I don't know what is. I grew up in the aviation business. I went through the fuel crisis in the 70s. I went through the Gulf Wars. I went through the fuel crises and everything else, and SARS. We always came out of it because we knew at the end there was a light at the end of the tunnel. But this particular time, we have to go back to thinking that the light at the end of the tunnel might be a train coming through that tunnel, and start rethinking it. Now that's from the aviation perspective. But if I owned a factory, if I'm producing consumer goods, yeah, okay, I might take a risk. But if I'm in a government and I start looking back on what's happened in the past 2, 3, 4 months that we've been going through this, and probably will for another 12 or 18, and I say to myself, I can't get test kits out, I can't get ventilators, I can't get pharmaceuticals that I need. There's closing down hospital beds because the hospitals are not profitable. That's got to stop.
Yeah.
And if the government do stop it, Chris, okay, what that means is you're going to have our industry is going to have to step up, and the profitability of it is one thing. The sustainability of it is more important than the profitability. Profitability has to be there. Only with profits can you invest in the future. Yeah. But the sustainability of our economy, the sustainability of our population to have proper health care and everything else, it's going to depend on aviation. And unless we nearshore everything, and that's a complete mindset change of the way the world works.
No, I agree. There'll have to be some. But also what you said there about the difference between profitability and sustainability. I mean, some of the things that have been going on now, Stan, for the last few years. I mean, some organisations are almost buying the business, and the sustainability of the business is just not possible. So they're putting everybody else's well-being and livelihoods at stake by mismanaging the situation, and it's wrong.
Well, about last year I spent almost 3 months on the road, excuse me, I spent almost 3 months on the road the year before last, actually, for one of my clients. Basically, the question was, what's going on out there? Go out, try to find out for me. So I interviewed airlines, freight forwarders, GSAs, GHAs, property developers, you name it. I spent 3 months doing all the continents. The end result of what I heard from the forwarding industry was the transparency that is available on the internet today means you can no longer get away with what we got away with in the past. And when I say get away, I'm not using it as a derogatory term. I'm just making the explanation easier.
Yeah.
I mean, consolidation, you could with consolidations, you can make massive profits. And then the airlines would get 50, 60, 70 cents a kilo to fly stuff from Chicago to Frankfurt, for example. And then one of the forwarders told me it cost them 90 cents a kilo to truck the goods from Dallas to Chicago to get on that consolidation.
Yeah.
That kind of stupidity.
Yeah,
that kind of stupidity. Yeah, that's madness, and it's ridiculous. So the airlines, also have to learn how to say no. Okay. But the point that I'm trying to make here is we cannot go on the way we did in the past. But it's not any longer a question of the airline saying we won't fly unless we make money. It's going to come back and bite us as an industry if we don't look as an industry at what could be the reaction of governments and industries as a result of what they're going through today.
Yep.
Are we going to make the China Trans-Pacific and the China-Europe route the end-all, be-all of all of our focus, or are we going to start thinking about it differently and realize that the sustainability of those routes in the future might not be there any longer if we have another crisis?
Stan, I 100% agree, and it's got nothing. Don't get me wrong. Now, I'm not trying to say shouldn't, or whatever, but for me, if you look at anything, if you look at the top 10 ports in the world, 8 of them are in China. Then you've got Jebel Ali as one, and I think the other one's where's the other one? Singapore, I think. I'm not sure, but eight of them are Chinese. Yeah. I mean, in anybody's books, that's putting too many eggs in one basket. And I think everybody has got to start to realise the world is a family, and when you have a family sitting around a table, you have to share. And if you're not sharing correctly, there'll be problems. And I think now we have to start addressing things in a much, much, much different way. And that sharing may well be more expensive, but it's more sustainable.
Well, exactly. And the airlines themselves have got to take up the mantle here too. I mean, they've got to start assessing how they do business, because e-commerce, the forwarders, they all understand what e-commerce is doing to them, and they're trying to figure out their survival plan. Basically, what the forwarders told me was that you can't make it on any longer on consolidations to get your P&L. So that the only way you can do it is through scale. So in other words, you can't do anything else. So you see DSV buying up all these forwarders, including probably one of the best forwarders going in the past was Panalpina. It's gone.
Yep.
You see Kuehne & Nagel is becoming a megalith. And then you'll see other ones, maybe like Siva is now bought up by a French company. The consolidation in these industries is because they can't get the margin on the smaller volumes. They need a lot more volumes going through the infrastructure that they invested in. But as they're striving to keep ahead of things, the airlines are faced with the same dilemma, right? The ground handling companies, when I see some of the pricing that's at GSA, the airlines say, we're not making money, so you can't make money. So if they can't make money, they can't pay their employees. In the U.S., some of the ground handling companies told me that the people that are working for them on shift are holding 2-3 jobs in order to be able to feed the family.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy.
Well, I remember, Stan, when I was living in the States and working there were some of the guys I knew, they'd finish a shift, go over to the car park, take one shirt off, put a different shirt on, and go and do another shift somewhere else. And
it's still existing today. It's still existing today.
Yeah. And at the end of the day now, you know, if we simplify things and if people are not focusing on being piece millionaires or tonnage millionaires or whatever, it's got to start now being a more fair approach. And then you can ask for more back as well. And this just constant lemming approach to cut costs, that has got to start to stop.
Well, you know, I'm not pitching my company here, but one of the reasons that we developed the training programs we did, and you know, you and I have discussed this for years. Excuse me. We wanted to give something back. It started as a conversation between Ram Menon and myself about trying to, you know, give something back, and we organized these courses basically to try to bring all the participants in the industry into one room: ground handling companies, airport authorities, forwarders, airlines, airport management especially, and get them talking to each other. Yeah, Chris, what I was saying basically is, well, we've got to look at a situation where things have to change, and it's starting. It's happening now. People are starting to change. People are starting to understand the airports have to start communicating with each other. Yeah. We see things like data and logistics corridors happening between Mumbai and Schiphol and Atlanta. Cargo community systems are going to change things. I think there is a real change coming from the airlines that are getting on board. But more importantly, what's happening with the airports and the GHAs, I really believe that that's the change factor for our industry to get things 100%. So that they work smoothly.
100%.
Yeah.
I've said for a long time, the GHAs, how they've developed from carriers outsourcing, etc., they are now the washing machines of the entire business. They clean everything up, and they've got a much more important part to play. And I also think the shippers need to take more responsibility for upstream direction of standards, quality, prerequisites, everything. So the positions of everybody in the team, I think, will start to change, and the values of those players will be according to the positions that they're playing.
Well, I totally agree. But, you know, it's the catch-22 for the GHAs. The large private equity companies and everything that have bought into these companies were expecting massive returns.
Yeah.
Okay, God bless them. I hope they get it. But let me ask you this question. If the massive returns that these PE companies are looking for, the airlines are not willing to pay because the supply chain is telling them they have to continuously lower costs.
Yep.
It's a catch-22. And I think once the airlines start developing this product portfolio approach, which we're pitching very hard and have been for the last 5-7 years, if they start doing this and the airports and the GHAs on the ground get their act together, and I think they are, it's going to be leading by example, especially with cargo community systems that what goes in has to come out, and whatever happens between Schiphol and Atlanta or Schiphol and Mumbai, for example, on pharma or any commodity, it will be handled with a speed and a quality and a transparency that will make it competitive. It'll work. The point I'm trying to make is, think about it this way, Chris, and in managing supply chains, you have a 777 of Cathay Pacific, and you have a 777 of BA flying Hong Kong, London every day.
Yep.
Well, maybe not now, but it will in the future. That flight is faster than anything else in the world in moving things between those 2 points. The FedEx isn't faster, UPS isn't faster, DHL isn't faster than a direct flight. It's impossible. The minute you go through a hub, you automatically add time.
Yep.
And also, in a lot of cases, quality, because the simple things is the more you handle something, you know as well as I do, the risk exponentially rises.
Yep.
So you have a direct flight with 10 pallets in the lower deck and at least 30 tons of cargo. And it's being sold for consolidation cheap prices. Why? Because they don't know how to sell. If you leverage that capacity and the value of that speed, and the airport in Hong Kong and the airport in London are talking to each other, communicating with each other through the GHAs, through cargo community systems, you can keep supply chains operating fast as anything else in the world.
Yep.
There's no need to onshore everything. You can onshore, use the 80-20 rule, use the 50-50 rule, 50% onshore, 50% sourced from these countries, and your balance of cost versus risk is there. But if we don't make air cargo viable in the future, and people not be worried that it's going to stop because passenger airplanes will stop with the next SARS, with the next Ebola, with the next MERS, whatever it'll be, we're doomed. We're doomed to becoming a subset of nothing. Freighters will only be used for military things or something like that, and it's totally unnecessary. We can cope with this. We can make a product by air freight that is needed today, and it can supply all the critical industries in the rough times, and it can supply the normal needs of the supply chain in normal times. But we've got to clean up our act.
100%. And also from talking about the downward spiral, for me, one of the biggest concerns then is safety and security issues, which is another threat that pops its head up when favour, fear, familiarity, and flexibility are too prevalent in any business.
Well, yeah, but if you have an airline that sets up a product, right? The known shipper rule can be the airline itself. If you take the U.S. for example, what's to stop an airline from opening up a daughter company that becomes a known shipper and provides all the safety and security checks needed for the product portfolio that they have that is using these expedited services? Nothing. There's nothing in the world that stops an airline from setting up a small entity that is a self-supporting entity, doing security check. If it's an unknown shipper, open it, deliver it, check it, then pack it and charge for it. If it's a known shipper, you pre-clear that factory or whatever. We have that in Canada here. The factories can be pre-certified, so the airline accepts that as a known shipper. But if you have an unknown shipper, what's wrong with setting up a company to do that? British Airways has been trying for years to get Zenda off the ground. Lufthansa has the Hayworld product. Emirates has Emirates Deliver. They're moving this way. Extend it into safety and security. One of the good things about TIACA recently is they signed an MOU with ICAO to produce a safety and security. Will be the first training modules that they'll be offering, and I'm very proud to say we're developing that for TIACA, and we're going to be working with ICAO to implement that. But these type of ideas are not just about making sure that nobody puts an ink cartridge on the airplane the next time around. It's to educate the industry how to change the way we do things, so that you can have your cake and eat it too. Meaning, you can have a product that is fast, safe, and reliable, yet speedy. Okay? Yeah. I mean, there's no reason why an airline can't do this. There's no reason in the world, except instead of spending $100 million on changing your first class cabin, spend $10 million and invest in a little bit in cargo and see what you get out of it. Will be a hell of a lot more bottom line value to you as an airline.
Yeah, I mean, you just touched on something there, Stan. I think the cabin classification and pricing and everything, that's probably going to be readdressed now, I think, moving forward. But cargo will be the one that that comes back first, and mainly because it's got to satisfy the hunger in all the markets within the supply chain. But definitely, it's going to be a new normal.
Well, Chris, what I would love to see one day? Revenue management systems, okay? Revenue management systems today are totally geared and very, very sophisticated towards the passenger market, right?
Yep.
I'd love to see a revenue management system where integrated into that is cargo. And you would leave behind bookings for cheap passengers in deference to cargo, which would, if you had a proper product portfolio, would pay you more in the utilization of that cylinder of aluminum that's flying, because that whole cylinder of aluminum is a revenue generating piece. Forget about differentiating between passenger, cargo, and mail. whatever produces the most revenue should get on board. And only through a proper revenue management system, which is something I've been trying to get the industry to understand for years now, you would integrate the cargo revenue management system into the passenger one. Because what difference do you care? It's revenue.
Yeah. I mean, there's always been there's always been a stigma between balancing passenger and cargo. But I think Stan, the way things are going now, and when things start to come back, it's going to make people think differently.
Well, look, Chris, to be honest with you, people shouldn't be making these decisions. We've got enough artificial intelligence capability. We have enough IT data capability to let the machines make the decision on what revenue gives the best for the airline. Yeah. And as far as the GHAs go, I totally agree with you. And I can go back to published articles I did 3-4 years ago, including for your own magazine, where I've said that the GHAs have to be treated with respect. They have to be treated with the kind of respect that will allow them to invest, because anything that this industry is going to do in the future is happening on the ground. Yeah. It's not happening in the air. The technology is gone as far as it can go. If anything, it'll regress for cargo if we start moving into the Concorde type thinking in the future. Okay, to get people from Tokyo to Los Angeles in 2 hours is the next great barrier. But the 777s, the 787s, the A350s, that's the, for the next 20, 30 years, what we're going to be looking at. So where's the future? It's on the ground. So start as an airline treating your GHA with some respect. Talk to them as cargo professionals, not sending in your people that are coming in from your facility services people or your revenue procurement revenue people, procurement people. That's not the right people to be talking to a GHA. The people that should be talking to a GHA is say, okay, what's your menu of services? If I give you my bulk cargo, I want a low price because I don't get much money for it. But if I'm handling pharma, I want this service. What do you charge for it? If I'm handling valuables, if I'm handling automotive or aerospace, any of the other verticals that I want differentiated in product, I should be willing to pay for that as an airline because the exporters are willing to pay for it. Who's making the money on that if it's not flowing to the airlines is an analysis that we've been talking about for 25 years.
Yeah, but I think the main fundamental there is as well, though, that the ground handling, the GHAs shouldn't be seen as the whipping boys, that whenever there needs to be some cost cutting, it gets pushed down on them and their contracts. And at the end of the day, people who are handing business with a 60-day notice period or guarantee with all their outlay as well is substantial. So I agree with you. They should be treated with a lot more respect and as a more integral part of the whole supply chain.
Chris, my background, I've been from chairman of the board. I started Airbridge. My background goes a lot into this business. And one thing I've told my team from day one is learn how to say no.
Yeah.
I mean, volume versus value. That's always been the motto in my thinking, and it's been the motto in my company since I started it. Volume versus value. If you don't focus all your attention on the value part of your proposition, you can buy volume. You cannot buy value. Okay? Yeah. You have to give value and people will pay for it. If they're not willing to pay for it, then forget about it. That's not the customer you want. If somebody wants to give you their business but wants a 90 because they're operating freighters and they say they want a 90-day cancellation clause or a 60-day cancellation clause, if you're foolish enough to agree to it, right? That's your own problem. You deserve to go out of business.
Yeah, but it's
the only reason they want it, Chris, is because they want the ability to pull out without any harm. Yet you're inspected to build a pharma center because of their business or something.
Yeah, I know the returns and how to get your returns on the investment that many of the GHAs have made with pharma is phenomenal, and especially now. And
yep.
I think the time now is there to change. I agree with you, Stan, and it's to change for everybody. Start looking at value, start looking at quality, and start looking at risk, and then be prepared to pay for it.
Well, Chris, the only thing I can say, and maybe it's a good way to end it, this what we're going through now is like like I said, World War II for not my generation. I wasn't born then. At least now I'm not that old. But
you had to get that one in, Stan, eh?
Yeah, but my parents' generation went through that, okay? And what we're going through now, and I'm talking about the economy now. I'm not talking about death and destruction. I mean, even though we're facing death in both cases, but nowhere near what happened then. But what I'm talking about is economically. It took 4, 5, 6 years, I think, until probably the mid 50s before UK really got its economy back in shape. There's lessons to be learned from that. What we're going through, and this will go on, especially in the U.S., because I think the U.S. is going to be impacted even more than Europe and China for various reasons, which I don't want to get into because it'll get political. But the situation that we're going to be into for the next 12 to 18 months is going to be forcing boardrooms to sit down and reassess how they do business. And one of the things they're going to say is, I cannot afford to have my supply chain jeopardized anymore. Therefore, what am I going to do? And if we as an industry don't have solutions for them, they're going to make decisions of their own.
Yeah.
And the decisions will be, the consumer's going to pay more. We're going to manufacture closer to home. We're going to have to probably import labor or something because we can't afford just to take the price of everything and double it overnight. Things are going to change. And we have to provide some solutions as an airline industry. Like I said before, if we don't have a return on investment that makes a viable freighter fleet available to almost every geographic cluster that needs it, shame on us.
Yeah. But I agree.
It's our own fault.
I agree what you said, Stan, about how long it takes to recover, and God forbid, the amount of time it took after the Second World War and everything, and the amount of support that was necessary. And then you look at quality programs, Deming, Cosby, all those gurus that had to inject a different way of thinking to bring people back up to the levels that were expected. It's going to be similar.
Yeah,
it's going to be a tough
time. Think of the impact. Yeah, just think of the impact right now on airports.
Yeah,
most of my customer base at the moment is I have a few airlines that we're very close with, for sure. But the airports are the biggest part of our business, and right now they're all suffering tremendously.
Ghost towns.
Yeah, and they're not going to come back and bounce back because the airlines won't. And what the airlines are going to be doing to recover is cost cutting, and again, it's going to go down the supply chain and see, ground handling agents, airports, concessions, everybody's going to be hit. It's going to take a while to get back, and we better be prepared.
Yeah, no, you're right. No, you're right, Stan. And just to keep things again on a stable and positive note, please God, things will start to improve. And again, all the people that are being affected, it takes somebody to help somebody else. And if people realise that, then maybe everybody will get through this a lot quicker.
Well, like I said before, the real heroes in my mind are the people that are, and not just banning the doctors, the nurses, and everything else that are going through this. I'm absolutely, in awe of the fact of what they're doing. When you see pictures out of Italy of these kids, most of them are young, sitting on the floor, just exhausted. It breaks your heart.
Yep.
But think also about the people that there are a lot of essential services that must go on too. Pharmaceutical pharmacies, supermarkets. Airports. My daughter, she's flying 2 relief flights into Narita in the next 4 days to bring back Canadians who are stranded over there. She's drafted in. The reason she's quite senior in the 20 years in the company, but she could have said no, and she didn't. And God bless her. And the same thing for others that are doing the same all around the world. These people deserve our thanks.
Yeah, total respect. Yeah. Stan, thanks very much. We'll be in touch. We'll keep in touch. Okay, God bless.
Yeah, Chris,
Stay
it's always
safe.
a pleasure.
Stay safe, my friend.
Yeah, I will.